First contact under fire. The Viserion research station hung in the void like a delicate crystalline snowflake, its translucent spires normally shimmering with the soft blue light of countless laboratories. But today, those spires blazed orange with weapons fire, as the swarm's bioships hammered against the station's failing shields. Dr. Zena Valeth's tendrils writhed in distress as she watched another section of the station's outer ring collapse under the relentless assault. The Viserions were scholars, not warriors. Their defensive systems were meant to deflect solar radiation and meteoroids, not survive a military engagement, especially not against the swarm. Containment breach in Biolab 7. The station's AI reported in its characteristic melodic tones, somehow maintaining its composure even as chaos erupted around them. Evacuating affected personnel. Shields at 12% capacity. Zena's assistant, Kral, hunched over the communications array, his normally iridescent scales dulled to a sickly gray with fear. The distress beacon is still broadcasting, but there's been no response from any of the nearby systems. The swarm must be blocking long-range communications. The swarm. Even thinking the name sent shivers through Zena's neural pathways. They had appeared 3 cycles ago, emerging from the depths of uncharted space. Not pirates or raiders, but something far worse, a hive-minded species that consumed everything in its path, incorporating useful genetic material into its ever-evolving arsenal of bioships. Director Valeth. The AI chimed again. I've detected an anomalous quantum signature at the edge of our sensor range. It doesn't match any known configuration in our database. Zena floated to the main display, her tendrils automatically arranging themselves into a pattern of scientific inquiry despite the dire circumstances. The reading was unlike anything she'd seen before, a rippling distortion in space-time that seemed to defy the laws of physics as she understood them. The distortion expanded, and something emerged, something that made Zena's 3 hearts skip simultaneously. It was a ship, but like no vessel she'd ever encountered. Where Viserion ships were organic curves and crystalline lattices, and the swarm's bioships were writhing masses of chitinous armor and biological weapons, this vessel was different. It was angular, geometric, with harsh lines and armored plates that gleamed dull gray in the light of the system's star. Massive cylindrical structures protruded from its hull, weapons, perhaps, but of a design completely foreign to her. Unknown vessel approaching, the AI announced. It's broadcasting on multiple frequencies, audio only. Let us hear it, Zena commanded, bracing herself for first contact in the middle of a battle. A voice filled the command center, clear, strong, and decidedly artificial in its perfect translation. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Warship Dauntless. We received your distress call. Looks like you could use a hand. Earth. Zena's tendrils twisted in recognition. She'd read the reports about this newly spacefaring species, but they were supposed to be confined to their home system, still developing FTL technology. Yet here they were, somehow, in a warship that rivaled the size of the largest Viserion vessels. Before Zena could respond, the swarm noticed the new arrival. 3 bioships broke off from their attack on the station, their organic hulls rippling as they reconfigured for combat. Streams of plasma fire erupted from their weapon pods, streaking toward the Earth vessel. Captain, Zena broadcast hurriedly, your ship must retreat. The swarm's weapons can pierce our strongest shields. Your vessel won't stand it. The words died in her throat as she watched the plasma bolts impact the Dauntless. Instead of burning through hull plating, they splashed against some kind of energy field that flickered with geometric patterns, more like a solid barrier than any shield technology she'd ever seen. Interesting weapons they've got there. Captain Chen's voice remained remarkably calm. Dr. Valeth, I presume. If you don't mind, we'd like to demonstrate why it's a bad idea to pick on scientists. Dauntless, Combat Configuration Alpha. Show them what humanity brings to a fight. The Earth ship's transformation was breathtaking. Panels shifted, revealing layers of weapons both familiar and alien. But it was the way the ship moved that truly captured Zena's attention. Instead of the graceful curves of Viserion ships or the organic undulations of the swarm, the Dauntless moved with precise, deliberate efficiency, like a predator that had spent millennia perfecting its killing stroke. "Fascinating design philosophy," Zena murmured, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. "They've created overlapping systems, redundancies within redundancies." The swarm bioships attacked again, this time coordinating their assault with the terrible efficiency of their hive mind. They were used to overwhelming their prey with superior numbers and adaptability. But the Dauntless responded with something entirely different, something that made Zena's scientific mind race with implications. The human ship fought with what seemed like impossible contradictions. Its weapons were primitive by Viserion standards. Chemical propellants, kinetic projectiles, and focused energy beams rather than quantum weaponry or gravitational distorters. Yet they were used with a precision and tactical awareness that spoke of centuries of warfare experience. Every move seemed calculated not just to damage the enemy, but to protect the station and minimize collateral damage. Multiple hull breaches detected in hostile vessels. The station AI reported, an unusual note of surprise in its melodic voice. The Earth ship's weapons. They're combining technologies in ways our models didn't predict as viable. Zena watched in fascination as the Dauntless demonstrated exactly why assumptions about primitive technology could be deadly. The human ship's kinetic weapons weren't stopped by the swarm's energy-dissipating membranes. Its electronic warfare systems, seemingly ancient by Viserion standards, sliced through the swarm's biological communication networks like a surgical laser. "Station command," be advised. Captain Chen's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "We're going to need you to lower your shields for exactly 2.3 seconds on my mark. Don't worry, we've got something special planned for our friends out there." Zena's tendrils coiled in alarm. "Lower our shields." "But the remaining swarm ships." "Trust us," Chen replied, and something in that human voice, that confidence born of countless battles, made Zena's decision for her. "On your mark, Captain." What followed would be studied in xenobiological warfare colleges for decades to come. The Dauntless launched what appeared to be simple metallic spheres, technology so basic it barely registered on the station's sensors. The swarm ignored them, their biological computers dismissing the objects as debris. That was their final mistake. When the station's shields dropped, the spheres detonated in a precisely calculated pattern. But instead of explosions, they released waves of electromagnetic energy combined with specific frequencies of radiation. The swarm ships, their biological computers suddenly bombarded with contradictory signals that bypassed their defenses, began to spasm and twist in space. Fascinating. Zena couldn't help but exclaim. "You weaponize their own neural networks against them." "Sometimes the oldest tricks are the best ones," Chen replied. "Now, Dr. Valiath, I believe we have some rescue operations to coordinate, and perhaps, once your station is secure, we could discuss a cultural exchange. I have a feeling humanity and the Viserions have a lot to learn from each other." As Zena watched the remaining swarm ships retreat, their hive-mind connection shattered by human ingenuity, she realized that the galaxy had just changed forever. Humanity hadn't just saved her station. They had demonstrated a way of thinking about technology and warfare that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. The age of humanity had begun, not with grand proclamations or diplomatic ceremonies, but with a single ship coming to the aid of strangers in need. And somehow, that seemed exactly right. The art of human warfare. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, her dark eyes fixed on the tactical display where dozens of new swarm signatures were emerging from quantum space. The initial skirmish had been won, but the real battle was about to begin. The swarm never retreated. They adapted. "Talk to me, Martinez," she called to her tactical officer. "What are we looking at?" Lieutenant Rosa Martinez's fingers danced across her holographic interface, her movements quick but precise. "The new bioships are different, Captain. They're incorporating some kind of organic armor we haven't seen before. Looks like they're learning from our previous attack." "They'd always do," Chen muttered. That was the problem with fighting a hive mind. Every encounter was a learning experience for the entire species. She turned to another screen where Dr. Valith's ethereal form floated, the Viserion scientist's tendrils moving in patterns that Chen was beginning to recognize as excitement, despite the dire situation. "Doctor, how's the evacuation proceeding?" "We've moved all non-essential personnel to the station's core," Zena replied. "But Captain, you must see this. The swarm's biological adaptation rate is unprecedented. They're incorporating traces of Viserion biotechnology from their attack on our outer labs. The implications are..." "Going to have to put the science on hold, Doctor," Chen interrupted gently. "Right now, I need to know if your station's core can withstand a level 4 quantum shockwave." The Viserion's tendrils froze mid-motion. "A quantum shockwave? But that would require..." "You're not planning to." "Martinez, sound battle stations. Dr. Valith, I suggest you reinforce your inertial dampeners. We're about to show the swarm why humans never stopped studying fluid dynamics." Chen's lips curved into a slight smile. "Helm, plot course Theta 9. Let's introduce these biological computers to some good old-fashioned chaos theory." The Dauntless's engines hummed to life, but instead of engaging the quantum drive or conventional thrusters, the ship began venting atmosphere in controlled bursts. To the swarm's organic sensors, it would appear as if the human vessel was suffering multiple hull breaches. "They're taking the bait," Martins reported. "Swarm formation is shifting to encircle us. They think we're crippled." Chen nodded. The swarm operated on perfect efficiency, their movements calculated to expend minimal energy while achieving maximum tactical advantage. But humanity had learned long ago that perfection could be a weakness. "Engineering, how are the modifications to the quantum core holding up?" Chief Engineer Patel's voice came back, tinged with his characteristic mix of worry and excitement. "The containment field is stable, Captain, but I must remind you that what we're attempting has never been tested outside of computer simulations. If the calculations are off by even a fraction, then we all get to experience what it's like to exist in 11 dimensions at once." Chen finished. "But if we're right, we're about to teach the swarm that sometimes the best move in 3-dimensional space is to cheat." The swarm ships pressed their attack, their new organic armor gleaming with an almost crystalline sheen. They had adapted to the electromagnetic pulses that had worked before, their neural networks now shielded by layers of bioengineered protection. But they were still thinking in traditional space warfare terms, even if those terms were biological rather than technological. "Doctor," Chen called to the Viserion scientist, "you might want to record this. I have a feeling it's going to rewrite some physics textbooks." The Dauntless's quantum core began to pulse with energy, but instead of channeling it into the drive system, the ship directed it through its hull in a precise pattern. The space around the vessel began to ripple, not with the usual distortions of quantum travel, but with something far more fundamental. "Swarm ships are responding," Martins reported. "They're confused. Their formation is breaking down." On the tactical display, the bioship's perfect coordination began to falter. Their organic computers, designed to calculate efficient paths through normal spacetime, couldn't process what the Dauntless was doing. The human ship wasn't just moving through space, it was temporarily rewriting the local laws of physics. In the early days of quantum mechanics, Chen explained to her bewildered alien audience, scientists discovered that particles could exist in multiple states simultaneously. We took that principle and scaled it up. Right now, the Dauntless exists in several quantum states at once, each one generating its own gravitational field. The effect on the swarm was devastating. Their bioships, relying on perfect coordination and predictable physics, found themselves caught in overlapping gravity wells that shouldn't have been possible. Their organic armor, so effective against conventional weapons, provided no protection against the fundamental forces of reality being locally rewritten. Multiple swarm vessels showing signs of extreme stress, Martinez announced, unable to keep the awe from her voice. Their hulls are literally tearing themselves apart. That's because their organic computers can't handle quantum uncertainty on this scale, Chen said. They evolved to process reality as a single definable state. We're showing them that reality has a lot more options than that. Dr. Valeth's tendrils were writhing in complex patterns that the ship's AI translated as extreme scientific excitement. Captain, this is revolutionary. You're not just fighting the swarm, you're forcing them to evolve beyond their fundamental nature. The philosophical implications alone. Philosophy later, Doctor. Right now, we need to press our advantage. Chen turned to her crew. All stations, prepare for Phase 2. Let's show them what happens when you combine quantum physics with good old-fashioned human stubbornness. As the Dauntless moved to engage the remaining swarm ships, Chen allowed herself a moment of pride. Humanity might be newcomers to the galactic stage, but they'd brought with them something unique, the ability to take the impossible and make it not just possible, but probable. The battle was far from over, but humanity had made its point. Sometimes the best way to fight an enemy that evolved was to change the rules of evolution itself. Breaking the hive. Deep within the Viserion research station, Dr. Zena Valeth's laboratory had transformed from a peaceful research facility into an impromptu war room. Holographic displays filled the crystalline chamber, showing the ongoing battle outside while human and Viserion minds worked together to understand their enemy. The swarm's adaptation rate is accelerating, Zena announced, her tendrils weaving complex patterns in the air as she analyzed the data. They're not just learning from each defeat, they're anticipating our next moves. Captain Chen stood before the main display, her reflection ghosting across the transparent alien screens. The Dauntless had bought them time with its quantum maneuvers, but the swarm was already developing countermeasures. They're operating like a neural network, she observed. Each encounter adds to their collective knowledge. Precisely. Zena's assistant Kral injected, his scales shifting to an excited purple. But look at these communication patterns. The swarm doesn't just share information. They share consciousness itself. Each ship is both an individual entity and part of the greater whole. Lieutenant Martinez, who had joined them from the Dauntless, frowned at the data streams. Like a distributed computing network, no central processor, but her eyes suddenly widened. Captain, what if that's their weakness? Chen turned to her tactical officer, recognizing the look of inspiration she'd seen so many times before. Go on, Lieutenant. In computer science, we learned about distributed denial of service attacks. DDoS. If you flood a network with too much information at once, you can overwhelm it. Martinez's fingers flew across her tablet, pulling up technical specifications. The swarm processes everything collectively. What if we gave them too much to process? Zena's tendrils curled with interest. Fascinating concept, but the swarm's neural pathways are incredibly robust. You would need to generate an enormous amount of data to overwhelm them. That's where your research comes in, Doctor, Chen said, pieces of a plan falling into place. Your station was studying quantum communications before the attack, wasn't it? Yes, but... Zena paused, her scientific mind making the connection. Oh. Kral accessed the quantum entanglement array, the one we were using for faster-than-light communication experiments. Chief Engineer Patel's voice came through the comm system from the Dauntless. Captain, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, we're going to need to modify our quantum core again. The power requirements alone will be massive, Chen finished. But we don't need it to work for long. Just long enough to give the swarm the worst headache in history. She turned to the assembled team. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored Viserions, I believe we're about to make scientific history. Whether that's a breakthrough or a catastrophe remains to be seen. The next hour was a blur of activity. Human engineers worked alongside Viserion scientists. combining technologies in ways neither species had imagined before. The station's quantum communication array, designed for delicate experiments in information transfer, was being repurposed into something far more aggressive. The principle is simple, Xena explained as they worked, her tendrils dancing with excitement despite the danger. We'll use the quantum entanglement array to generate millions of conflicting data points simultaneously. When the swarm tries to process this information through their collective consciousness, their distributed neural network will be forced to try to reconcile irreconcilable data. Martinez finished, like trying to divide by zero, but across an entire hive mind. Outside, the battle continued to rage. The swarm had adapted to the Dauntless's quantum state tricks, their bioships now generating their own localized reality distortions. But they hadn't yet realized that the real threat wasn't coming from the human warship's weapons. Array modifications complete, Krull reported, his scales now a determined blue-gray. But Dr. Valith, the power requirements, will burn out every quantum circuit in the station. Better than letting the swarm burn through everything else, Chen said grimly. Status of the civilian evacuation. All non-essential personnel are secured in the core, Martins reported. Emergency systems are ready for potential power loss. Chen nodded, her expression resolute. Dr. Valith, your station, your call. Xena's tendrils moved in a pattern that the humans were beginning to recognize as determination. The Viserion Science Academy would never approve of using quantum communication technology as a weapon, which makes this, perhaps, the most important experiment of my career. She turned to her console, initiating quantum overflow sequence. The effect was both subtle and spectacular. There was no explosion, no dramatic light show. Instead, space itself seemed to hiccup as the quantum entanglement array began broadcasting. Each particle of information was entangled with millions of others, creating a cascade of data that defied the normal laws of cause and effect. The swarm's response was immediate and dramatic. Their perfect formation dissolved into chaos as their collective consciousness tried to process information that couldn't exist simultaneously. Bioships began moving in random patterns, their organic computers overwhelmed by paradoxical data. It's working, Martinez exclaimed. Their neural network is collapsing under the data load. Not collapsing, Xena corrected, her tendrils weaving excitedly. Evolving. Look at these readings. We're forcing them to develop new ways of processing information. The implications for consciousness studies alone. Scientific breakthrough later, Chen interrupted. Tactical advantage now. Dauntless, all weapons free. Target any swarm ship showing signs of network disruption. Let's show them why you don't mess with human ingenuity backed by Viserion science. The battle that followed would be studied by xenobiologists and military tacticians for generations to come. The swarm, their hive mind fragmented by the quantum data assault, found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't adapt to, because adaptation itself had become a liability. Each attempt to process the conflicting information only spread the disruption further through their neural network. As the Dauntless's weapons found their marks among the confused swarm vessels, Chen allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had just proved something she'd always believed, that sometimes the best way to win wasn't through superior firepower or technology, but through the simple human talent for thinking outside every box, even the boxes that contained reality itself. Counter-Strike. The command center of the Dauntless hummed with tension as Captain Chen studied the tactical display. The quantum data assault had scattered the swarm's frontline forces, but their main fleet was still out there, adapting and evolving. More concerning was the massive signature appearing at the edge of their sensor range. The swarm's command ship had arrived. That's one big bug, Lieutenant Martinez whispered, her eyes fixed on the readings. The vessel was unlike anything they'd seen before, more organic space station than ship, its chitinous hull stretching for kilometers. The neural hub, Dr. Valeth's holographic form observed, her tendrils moving in patterns of scientific fascination. We've only theorized about its existence, the central node that coordinates the entire swarm consciousness. Chen's expression hardened. Then that's our target. Take out the head, and maybe the body will follow. The question is how to get close enough without being torn apart. Captain, Chief Engineer Patel's voice came through the comm. I've been analyzing the data from our quantum assault. The swarm's adaptation wasn't just random evolution. They're developing specialized neural pathways to process paradoxical information. If we try the same trick again, they'll be ready for it. Chen finished. We need something new. Something they can't adapt to because it doesn't follow any logical pattern. She turned to Dr. Valeth's hologram. Doctor, what's the most irrational thing in the universe? The Viserion scientist's tendrils twisted in what might have been confusion. By definition, quantum uncertainty could be considered human nature. Martinez interrupted, a slow smile spreading across her face. Captain, are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Chen nodded. The swarm operates on logic, efficiency, and perfect coordination. Even their adaptations follow predictable patterns. But humans, she allowed herself a grim smile. We're anything but predictable. What followed was perhaps the strangest battle planning session in human or Viserion military history. Instead of calculating optimal attack vectors or power distributions, the combined crew focused on ways to be as chaotic and unpredictable as possible. We'll need to modify the quantum core again, Patel said, his voice mixing worry and excitement in equal measure. But this time, instead of generating conflicting data, we'll use it to enhance our ship's natural electromagnetic signature, making us appear as dozens of ships instead of one. Martinez caught on. But each projection will be doing something completely different, completely irrational. Dr. Valeth's tendrils waved in what the humans had learned was her equivalent of head shaking. The energy requirements would be astronomical. Even with our station's power grid tied into your systems, you'd have minutes at most before overload. Minutes might be enough, Chen said. The swarm thinks in patterns, in logical progressions. We're going to show them why human unpredictability has been giving military strategists headaches for thousands of years. The plan they developed was, by any rational standard, insane. The Dauntless would use its modified quantum core to project multiple phantom signatures of itself, each one executing maneuvers that defied both tactical logic and several laws of physics. Meanwhile, the real ship would hide among its own echoes, using the confusion to close with the swarm command ship. Think of it as a magic show, Chen explained to her bewildered alien allies. The key to any good trick isn't the technology. It's making your audience look where you want them to look. As final preparations were made, Martinez approached her captain privately. Ma'am, if this works, and that's a big if, we'll be in point-blank range of that thing. The Dauntless wasn't built for that kind of close-quarters combat. No, Chen agreed. She wasn't. But you know what humans are really good at? Improvising. She opened a channel to engineering. Patel, remember that crazy idea you had about using the quantum core as a pulse weapon? The one that might tear a hole in space-time. Yes, Captain, but I never finished the calculations because it was too dangerous to. A pause. Oh no. Oh yes. Chen smiled. Time to get creative, Chief. Very creative. The battle began with what appeared to be a massive malfunction. The Dauntless suddenly split into dozens of phantom images, each one behaving in ways that made no tactical sense. Some flew straight at the enemy, others executed impossible maneuvers, while still others appeared to be running away only to reverse course without warning. The swarm's response was everything they'd hoped for. Their hive mind, programmed to analyze and counter enemy tactics, tried to find the pattern in the chaos. But there was no pattern. Only the pure unpredictability of human tactical insanity. Main fleet is splitting up, Martinez reported, struggling to keep the excitement from her voice. They're trying to engage all targets simultaneously. Swarm command ship is. They're actually backing away. I think we're giving their tactical computers a nervous breakdown. That's because they're trying to predict what we'll do next, Chen said. And we don't even know what we'll do next. Helm, execute random pattern delta. And I mean random. Don't even think about it. Just feel it. The Dauntless danced through space, its movements guided more by intuition than calculation. Each crew member contributed to the chaos, making split-second decisions that no tactical computer could anticipate because they defied all logic. Energy spike from the command ship, Martinez called out. They're charging some kind of biological weapon. Now that, Chen said with grim satisfaction, is exactly what we wanted them to do. All hands, brace for close-quarters combat. Engineering, initiate quantum pulse sequence. Let's show them why betting against human creativity is always a bad idea. The real Dauntless, hidden among its phantom images, close to point-blank range with the massive swarm vessel. What happened next would be debated in military academies for generations to come. Legacy of Hope. Space itself seemed to hold its breath as the Dauntless closed with the swarm command ship. The human vessel, now a mere speck against the massive organic structure, had achieved what the swarm's tactical computers had deemed impossible. It had turned chaos itself into a weapon. Quantum core at maximum output, Chief Engineer Patel reported, his voice steady despite the strain evident in it. Whatever we're going to do, Captain, it needs to be now. We've got maybe 2 minutes before the containment field fails. Captain Chen stood at the center of her bridge, her calm demeanor masking the intensity of the moment. Status of the swarm consciousness, Doctor. Dr. Valeth's holographic form flickered as she analyzed the readings from her station. Fascinating. Their neural network is trying to divide itself, to isolate sections from our chaos effect. They're actually attempting to evolve past their own hive mind nature. Then let's give them something new to evolve toward, Chen said. Martinez, target their primary neural clusters. Patel, on my mark, initiate the quantum pulse sequence. And everyone. She allowed herself a small smile. Think happy thoughts. The Dauntless's quantum core, already stressed from generating phantom images, began to pulse with a new rhythm. But instead of projecting false signatures, it was doing something far more fundamental. It was creating a localized bubble of altered probability. Quantum field stable, Patel reported. Though I should note that stable is a relative term when we're basically telling physics to take a coffee break. The swarm command ship reacted, its massive organic hull rippling as biological weapons charge. But they were still trying to predict what the human ship would do next, still trying to find patterns in chaos. They're launching some kind of biological missiles, Martinez announced. Thousands of them. No, millions. Each one appears to be carrying a different genetic payload. They're trying to evolve faster than we can attack. Dr. Valeth's tendrils waved in scientific excitement despite the danger. It's absolutely brilliant. They're attempting to become something our weapons can't harm. Problem is, Chen said, they're still thinking like a hive mind. Still trying to find the perfect solution. She opened a channel to all hands. Crew of the Dauntless, I want you each to think of the most impossible thing you can imagine. Don't tell anyone, don't try to coordinate. Just hold that thought, and let the quantum field do the rest. What happened next defied explanation by either human or Viserion science. The Dauntless's quantum field, powered by the random thoughts of its crew, created a bubble of pure possibility around the ship. Reality itself seemed to hiccup as probability waves collapsed in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The swarm's biological missiles, each evolved to counter a specific threat, found themselves trying to adapt to everything and nothing simultaneously. Their perfect genetic algorithms encountered something they couldn't process, the pure, unfiltered imagination of human consciousness. Direct hit on their primary neural cluster, Martinez called out. But, Captain, these readings don't make sense. It's like they're dreaming. Dr. Valeth finished, her tendrils weaving patterns of pure wonder. You've introduced random thought patterns into their neural network. individual imagination into a collective consciousness. You haven't destroyed them, you've taught them how to dream. The massive swarm command ship's surface began to shift and change, not with the purposeful efficiency of their usual adaptations, but with the random beauty of pure creativity. Colors bloomed across its hull, patterns formed and dissolved, and for the first time in their species' history, each component of the hive mind began to experience individual thought. Their weapon systems are powering down, Martins reported, her voice filled with disbelief. The entire command ship is transforming. Chen watched as the creature that had once been the swarm's command center continued its metamorphosis. They spent their entire existence pursuing perfect efficiency, perfect adaptation. But they never understood that true evolution requires something more. It requires imagination. The implications are staggering. Dr. Valeth said, "You've triggered a fundamental change in their consciousness. They're not just evolving physically anymore. They're evolving philosophically." The battle ended not with destruction, but with transformation. The swarm, touched by human chaos and creativity, began a new phase of evolution. Their hive mind didn't dissolve, but rather transformed into something new. A collective consciousness that preserved individuality, unity that celebrated diversity. Days later, as the Viserion station began its repairs and the Dauntless prepared for its journey home, Captain Chen stood in Dr. Valeth's laboratory, watching the remnants of the transformed swarm through the station's sensors. "They're creating art," the Viserion scientist observed, her tendrils moving in patterns of joy. "Look at these structures they're growing. No practical purpose, no tactical advantage. They're creating simply for the sake of creation." "Sometimes the best way to win a war isn't to destroy your enemy," Chen replied. "Sometimes it's to help them become something more than they were." She turned to the scientist. "Your people study the fundamental forces of the universe. We humans, we study the fundamental force of change itself. And in doing so, you've given the galaxy something it desperately needed," Dr. Valeth said. "Not just a defense against the swarm, but a reminder that the most powerful force in the universe isn't technology, or biology, or even quantum physics. It's the ability to imagine something different and make it real." As the Dauntless began its preparations for the journey home, its crew knew they had achieved something far greater than a military victory. They had demonstrated why humanity, despite its relative youth among the stars, would always have something unique to offer the galaxy: the power to dream impossible dreams and the determination to make them come true. The age of humanity had truly begun, not with conquest or domination, but with the gift of imagination itself. And somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, the beings that had once been the swarm were learning to dream their own impossible dreams.